बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम।
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala falah. Hayya ala falah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Before starting the service, I want to remind you to please pray for the whole of humanity, that may Allah keep everyone safe and sound and free from harm. The world is going through very difficult times, and some people are having difficulty with food and provisions and so on. Try and help them practically if you can. I want special prayers for our members in Cuba, particularly Brother Ali and his wife Fatma and their children. They're having some medical problems. Brother Jalil in Italy, a very dedicated worker who, despite his serious illness, writes articles for the Light every month. And of course, our brother Rodriguez in Florida, who is also having some family problems and legal difficulties, etc. May Allah keep all of them safe and sound and free from harm. The first recitation is from chapter 55, verses 1 to 10. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ar-Rahmanu allamal Qur'ana khalaqal insana علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام. The benefactor taught the Quran. He created humans and taught them expression. The sun and the moon follow a law, and the herbs and trees adore Allah. And the heavens, He raised it high, and He set up the balance. You must not disturb that balance. And keep up the balance with equity, nor fall short in the measure. And the earth, He has set it for His creatures. The next one is chapter 4, verses 119 and 120. دلنهم ولا منينهم ولا آمرنهم ولا يبدلن آذان الأنعام ولا أمر لهم فليغيرن خلق الله ومن يتخذ الشيطان وليا من دون الله فقد خسر خسرا مبينا يعدهم ويمنيهم وما يعدهم الشيطان إلا غرورا. And Allah has cursed the devil. And he said, certainly, the devil said, certainly I will take from your servants an appointed portion. And certainly I'll lead them astray and excite in them vain desires and bid them so that they will slit the ears of the cattle and bid them so that they will alter your creation. And whoever takes the devil for a friend forsaking Allah, he indeed suffers a manifest loss. He promises them and excites vain desires in them. And devil promises them only to deceive. And the last verse I want to recite is verse 60. of Al-Baqarah. كُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا مِنْ رِزْقِ اللَّهِ وَلَا تَعْثَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ مُفْسِدِينَ. Eat and drink of the provisions of Allah and act not to cause disruption, making mischief in the land. Sadaqallahul Aliyyul Azim. And I want to point out to you that from chapter 55, the verse that I recited, or verses I recited, the last one says, and the earth Allah created for all his creatures. This is not just for human beings, but everything living that Allah has created. And God says that everything that I have created, the sun and the moon and the herbs and the trees, they all follow a law. And I have created a balance on this earth. And you may not disturb that balance. These days, in Egypt, there is this big conference, COP27, which is where heads of government and state have gathered to deal with global warming. This is a polite way of saying to deal with the pollution that has been caused on the earth. The pollution that has been caused on the earth by Western powers, more specifically the United States. I still remember the times when there were these huge American cars. They were called gas guzzlers. And they did about 5 miles to a gallon and emitted huge amounts of damaging vapors and gases into the air. What does God say? Do not disturb the balance I have created. Just think about this. That God created, one way to look at balance is that God created this amount of oxygen in the air, this amount of nitrogen, this amount of carbon dioxide, this amount of carbon monoxide, and so on. And by using these gas guzzlers, the amount of poisonous gases, carbon dioxide and monoxide and so on, was increased in the atmosphere. And that pollution has caused global warming. And the sad thing is that all these things are in the Quran, and the Western powers and countries were doing these things. And we Muslims simply closed our eyes and just followed them without thinking about anything, without thinking about the consequences. God says, herbs and trees adore me. How? By following him, by understanding the laws that apply to him. But the devil said, I will take from your servants an appointed portion, a certain fraction. And what will they do? They will alter Allah's creation. And what have we done? By increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in air, we have altered Allah's creation. But then, this is not the only thing. We used chemical fertilizers in the fields, and I may have mentioned this example before. Crops don't use up all the chemical fertilizer that you put in the field. A lot of it is left behind. And what happens to that? What happens to that is when it rains, it turns into a liquid. And liquid and goes into the earth and poisons rivers and the sea. And people saw that in some areas where there was excessive use of chemical fertilizer, salmon and other fish in the river died because the river was being polluted. If we go back, God says the sun and the moon follow a law, and herbs and trees, and the heavens. He set up the certain balance, which means everything in the universe follows this law of balance. And we are here and we exist only because that balance is there. Once that balance is gone, we put our very existence into danger. And there are thousands of examples of this. I just mentioned two: gas guzzlers and chemical fertilizer. But when we have too many people, when we are overpopulated, then what happens? The balance of humanity on earth is disturbed. Every human being needs space. The more humans you have, the more homes you need. The more humans you have, the more schools you need. The more humans you have, the more hospitals you need. The more humans you have, the more factories you need to provide jobs for them. So you need to build all these things: schools and hospitals and factories and offices and so on. But then at the same time, the more humans you have, the more food you need. But the land that could have been used to plant and cultivate crops and food for human beings, you've used it up for homes and schools and colleges and offices and factories. So where are you going to get the land? This earth only has a limited amount of land. This earth only has a fixed amount of habitable land. You can't grow crops on the North Pole or South Pole and other places. And yes, the devil did incite vain desires. I want 2 cars, I want 3 cars. And the list goes on. And the last verse I recited: eat and drink of the provisions of Allah and act not corruptly, making mischief in the land. Waste is also making mischief in the land. The Holy Prophet was passing by and he saw a man performing wudu. And he saw this man was wasting a lot of water in performing the wudu. And the Holy Prophet stopped and he said, "Do not waste." And the man said, "O Prophet of Allah, is there waste in water?" And the Holy Prophet said, "Yes. Even if you are performing wudu by the shores of a river, if you use too much water, you would be wasting it." And he held up his hands and he said, "You should think that this is the amount of water that you have." But what do we see? When people go to perform wuzu, the tap is turned on and water is flowing away, being wasted. Drinking water, clean water is being put into waste. And I think that the verse of the Quran that I didn't recite applies to this. It says, corruption has appeared in the land and on the sea because of what people have done to them. And it is these people who will taste the result, the consequence of this corruption. See, people generally take corruption and facade and so on to mean fighting, etc., etc. But they apply to everything that disturbs the balance that God has created in the universe, on this earth and elsewhere. So Muslims certainly should turn to that. You know, if you go to Lahore and you go to the Lahore fort and you go to the king's quarters, even in the middle of summer, you have cool air blowing through those quarters. How? Because that is how they designed those quarters, to be cool in summer without the use of air conditioners and without the use of electricity thereby. So early on, we played a role in keeping the environment safe and keeping the balance that God had created. But then we gave that up and we just started following Western nations in creating facade on earth, in disturbing the balance that God had created. And we find that we've ended up in the same situation with pollution, etc. I was in India one time, and I woke up and I went out with my friend. We were going to drive somewhere, and it was pitch dark because of smog. You couldn't see anything. This was 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. Why? Because of pollution. Rather than taking the high road and teaching the West that they shouldn't be doing these things, people of East also started indulging in the same practices. But there's another Western concept that I want you to consider and ask your government. There is something called the good neighbor principle. What it says is that if I'm doing something on my property, it is my duty to take care to make sure that my neighbor on the left or the right or behind me is not poorly impacted by what I'm doing. It's based on English case law, and but it got the name the good neighbor principle, that you keep in mind the impact of your actions on your neighbor. And if that neighbor or his house are damaged by what you're doing in your house, then you are responsible. You need to make restitution to that neighbor. You need to pay that neighbor a fine or some compensation or whatever. Now, the question I ask the Western governments is this. It is not the Eastern countries, it's not the Western Sahara, it's not Iraq and Iran and India and Pakistan and Burma and whatever Ceylon that have caused global warming by polluting the atmosphere. It is the West. It is the West, America in particular, but also you can put in Western Europe and all these countries in that category as well. Now, under the good neighbor principle, which is a part of your law, shouldn't you have considered the impact of what you were doing on these countries? Because the globe has now shrunk. And it's not just Canada that is America's neighbor. It's not just France that is Germany's neighbor. They are also neighbors of all the eastern countries and the southern countries which have been impacted. When you increase the amount of carbon dioxide in air over North America, that doesn't remain still over North America, that drifts all over the world. It increases the proportion over Africa and South America and Australia and China. Well, China is in itself is a polluter, but other countries, Iran and Iraq and India and Pakistan and whatever else. That excessive amount of carbon dioxide just doesn't just remain over North America or over the EU. So under the good neighbor principle, which is a principle of your own legal systems, shouldn't you be paying these Eastern countries substantial damages to cope with global warming? Pakistan, for example, needs $300 billion to deal with the effects of the current floods and global warming. There are people there still living in tents. Land cannot be cultivated because it's waterlogged. Cattle have been washed away or died because of lack of grass and pasture, etc. So it goes on. Why shouldn't that farmer in Pakistan, whose cattle have all died in this flood, claim that it is the fault of United States government and ask for compensation? Why not? In America, if a company discharges some chemical onto the land around it, and that land becomes dangerous and polluted and poisons people and poisons cattle and so on, that company has to pay compensation to the people whose health it has damaged. So why shouldn't the same principle apply when it's United States and some Eastern country? The reason is obvious. These countries are poor, these countries are weak, these countries are not united. Whereas the United States is rich and powerful. As they say in Urdu, jiski lathi, uski bhans. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quranil azim wa nafa'ana wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim. Innahu ta'ala jawadun kareemun malikun bil raufur rahim. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udzu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasul. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma ansur man nasara dina Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam waj'alna minhum. Allahumma akhzul man khazala dina Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa la taj'alna minhum. Ibadallah rahmakumullah, innallaha ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha anil fahsya'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'izukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Uzkurullaha yazkurkum wa yastajib lakum wa lazikrullahi akbar wallahu ya'lamu ma tasma'un.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah.
Dean, join the prayers, please.
Hayya ala salah, hayya ala salah, hayya al falah, qamatis salah, qamatis salah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah.
Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده.
ربنا
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده.
ربنا
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أستغفر الله أستغفر الله. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا اللهم أنت السلام. Thank you for joining us for our Friday service. I hope you found it useful. With the prayer that whoever you are and wherever you may be, may Allah keep the whole of humanity safe and sound and free from harm. I take my leave of you. Our next broadcast will be on Monday, inshallah, which will be Tadabbarul Quran at 7 and reflections on the Holy Quran at 7:30. Until then, Assalamu alaikum, Khuda Hafiz, and goodbye.